Hey guys, it's Luke Yan, and today I am going to be talking about the best and worst books slash most disappointing books that I read in 2022. In 2022, I read 152 books, which I'm really happy about considering I was dealing with college applications and just some more personal things that were making it a little bit difficult to read throughout the year. I had an okay reading year in terms of the books that I read. One of the top 10 books that I had this year is actually a 4-star read, which has never happened to me before. Usually I have 10 5-star reads, but this year I only had 9, plus the one that I feel should be on the list. And then I do only have 8 worst slash most disappointing books, and one of them was just a little bit disappointing, not necessarily the worst. So I feel like I did okay this reading year. But a lot of the books that I read were 3 stars or 4 stars, so nothing that I absolutely loved, and not a ton of books that I despised. But we're going to start with my favorite books of the year, start on a happy note, and number 10, I actually have a reread and the 4-star book on this list, and that is Flame in the Mist by Renee Ahdieh. This is the first book in the Flame in the Mist duology. I read this for the first time in 2017, so a very, very long time ago. And I wanted to finish the series up in 2022 in February, but I decided that I should probably reread this book because even when I was reading recaps of it, I barely remembered anything. So I decided to reread it, and I enjoyed it so much more the second time around. I almost bumped it up to a 5-star, so that's why it's on this list. And even now, I'm remembering scenes from this book, and I just absolutely love it. This is a somewhat of a Mulan retelling. It follows a young girl named Mariko, who is the daughter of a samurai, and one day when she is off to visit the Imperial Palace, her carriage is swarmed by this rebel group called the Black Clan, and she ends up at some point dressing as a man and infiltrating the clan. And that was definitely a horrible description, but it has been a little bit of a while since I read the book, so I can't I'm not as good with the synopsis, but I loved Mariko. I love Renee Ahdieh's writing. This is set in a fantasy world inspired by feudal Japan, and I loved the atmosphere. She is so good. Renee Ahdieh is so good at transporting readers, and I just felt I was right there with the characters. I loved all the characters. The writing was amazing. The plot was so addicting. I know a lot of people say this book is really, really slow, but I love it, and I am super happy that I reread it because for a while I kind of just felt very meh about it, but I am really happy, as I said, that I decided to reread it and finish out the series because it is one that definitely will stick in my mind for a really long time. Number 9, I have With You All the Way by Cynthia Hand. This is a YA contemporary novel that I was not expecting to love so much, but it follows a young girl named Ada who has this boyfriend, and she decides that she wants to lose her virginity, but she ends up finding her boyfriend cheating. And so on a family vacation to Hawaii, she decides that she will lose her virginity. She makes this whole plan, and then a personal sort of family drama thing ends up happening and rocking her world, and she kind of doesn't really know what she's going to do. But I love this book. It's my favorite YA contemporary that I've read in a really, really long time. I love Cynthia Hand's writing. I loved the main character. I thought the Maui setting was so fun. I can't remember if it was Maui or just somewhere else in Hawaii, but I think it was Maui, I can't remember. But, I loved the setting of this book. I thought the writing was so good, and I thought it touched on, some very interesting issues, not just the whole sex and virginity thing, but there were a lot of things that happened in this book that felt very, timely, and not in, a pandering way, but more in, just adding in different commentary to, make the book stronger. And yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was, again, one of the best YA contemporaries that I've read in a really long time, and so underrated. I haven't heard anyone talk about this book, and it's amazing. So, people, get on it. I love Cynthia Hand's writing. She is so great at, crafting really interesting characters and, making a plot they wouldn't think is so interesting really, really addicting. So yeah, I love this book. It's also really short too. It's a great summer beach read. The 8th book, or the number 8 slot, goes to another Cynthia Hand book, and that was The How and the Why. I actually have a full reading vlog where I read this book because I read it during a Reading 7 Books in 7 Days challenge in August, so you can check that out. I'll link it in the description box below. But this follows a girl named Cass, I can't remember if she goes by Cass or Cassie, but her real name's Cassandra, and she is adopted, and her mom is sick with cancer, and she decides that when she turns 18, she's going to try to figure out who her birth mother is, and it kind of goes into all of this stuff. There's some, like, social drama, because she's trying to figure out where she wants to go to college and all this stuff. And again, you can find out all my like in-depth thoughts on the books. It's not spoilery, so it's completely spoiler-free, that blog, so definitely check it out. And you'll get more of like my in-depth, in-the-moment thoughts. But yeah, I really enjoyed this book, and again, another great YA contemporary that I would really recommend. It is pretty long, but it absolutely flies by. Number 7, I gave to 6 Crimson Crayons by Elizabeth Lim. Another book I was not expecting to love so much, but this is the first book in a YA fantasy duology that follows a young princess named Shiori who lives in this kingdom where magic is outlawed, but she has magic, and she ends up seeing her stepmother perform magic, and her stepmother sees this, and knows that Shiori now knows her secret, and she ends up cursing Shiori's brothers to turn into cranes, and so Shiori kind of goes on this journey to help her brothers and figure out what is really going on with her stepmother and break this curse. I love this book. It was such an interesting fantasy world. It has like an East Asian influence, which I thought was really interesting. I loved all the mythology in this book. I actually saw a few videos with Elizabeth Lim where she's explaining like certain things that are in this book and why she chose them and the sort of mythological / historical tie. And I really enjoyed all of it, and I loved Shiori as a main character. She was so interesting, and she was so driven. She cared about her family so much. She wanted to break this curse, and she was just so, like, resilient, and I loved the romance in this book. There's dragons in here, too. Just, I am a sucker for, like, mythological fantasy, and just, like, I loved this setting. You will find that most of my favorite books have really interesting settings, and that's always an important, like, thing to me, and I just loved the retelling aspect, and it was just so great. I don't love the second book in the series as much, just because it is very different. It's not so much of a quest. Well, it is a quest, but it's not so much of like a unraveling a mystery, trying to figure out like how to break a curse, going on this journey. It's a little bit more, it's just different. I still really love that book too, but it wasn't as good, in my opinion, as this first one. I think this first one was just a great way to set up the fantasy world. The writing is amazing, and all the characters are super gripping. In the number 6 slot, I have Bladebreaker by Victoria Aveyard. This is the sequel to Realmbreaker, which follows kind of just this ragtag team of misfits. They're kind of like the second Fellowship of the Ring, as Victoria Aveyard describes them. They are kind of asked to protect their realm, which is being flooded by monsters that are coming in from other realms, by this like evil guy, and they are kind of like the JV team, because the people that were originally called to help this were all slaughtered. I love this book. It was the sequel, and it just like expanded the world so much more. There were a lot of like really great character moments in this book that I really enjoyed, because a lot of the characters, while I did really like them in Realmbreaker, they felt a little bit flat just because the plot was so like high octane. But in this book they got a lot more expansion, and this book is really, really long. So obviously there's great plot moments as well, but I just really liked the character-driven nature of this story, and I think that it really did a great job of breaking open the story and kind of getting a lot of really interesting plot movements while also delving into the characters' personal lives and their interactions with one another, since they've been with each other for longer, because the like quest is like they're in the thick of it now. And the ending of this book is insane, and I cannot wait for the third book. I don't know if it's coming out this year, but I'm really excited for it nonetheless. Now we are moving into the top 5. At number 5, I have Forging Silver into Stars by Bridget Kemmerer. Honestly, this and Bladebreaker kind of switch spots sometimes. I don't know. I love all the books on this list. It was really hard to like actually rank them, but I have a full vlog of this book too, which I can link in the description box below, another spoiler-free vlog from that week. And this is a spin-off to the Cursebreaker series. I'm not even going to try to explain this book because there's so many moving parts and it's really difficult to explain. And it's also not too plot-driven. It's mostly just focusing on these 3 main characters, Tycho, Jax, and... oh my god, what is his name? Callan. Callan is her name. My brain, like, short-circuited for a second. I love Bridget Kemmerer's writing. The way that she builds fantasy worlds is so amazing, and this is a very, like, character-driven fantasy book, which I really loved, but there's also a lot of like actual fantasy aspects. Like The Cursebreaker series is kind of like, you have main characters that are from our world, you have main characters that are from this fantasy world. This book is all characters from the fantasy world, and so there's a lot less like explanation of this world because you're not expected to have that knowledge from Cursebreakers. But it's kind of just like, you're not with a character that's learning all this for the first time. These characters have been entrenched in this world for a really long time, so it's very natural to them. And I love their interactions with one another. I think it's like a perfect bridge between character-driven and plot-driven. And I just love Bridget Kemmer's writing, the way that she can like describe a scene. I like can immediately picture it, and there's just so many like amazing vibes in this book. Like, Gallant is a baker, so you get all of that. There's like fighting scenes, and then there's like obviously the palace stuff, so it's kind of just like a blend of all these really interesting fantasy tropes from these three different perspectives. And I love the romances in this book, and I'm so excited for the sequel. Again, I don't know if it's coming out this year, but I really hope it does. And yeah, I cannot wait. Number 4, I have Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is a book that not a lot of people have talked about, considering it's Taylor Jenkins Reid. Everyone loves The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo and Daisy Jones and the Six. I also love The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, but this one is a close second. This book follows Carrie Soto, who at the start of this book sees a tennis player, because she's a tennis player, she sees a tennis player break her record for the most amount of Grand Slams won. And so Carrie, being who she is, she's very fiery and wants to be at the top all the time. She decides that she's going to come out of retirement and try to beat this girl's new record, or keep her from beating. This girl ties, so they have the same number of Grand Slams. She's going to try to beat this girl and make sure that she doesn't take her record. That was a very jumbly way of describing it, but I kind of like messed up in the beginning. But anyway, Carrie Soto is one of like the most well-developed characters I've read in a really long time, because this book, we obviously start with her watching that tennis match that kind of defines the rest of the book, but then we kind of back up and see how she got to tennis, why she loves tennis, kind of her father and all of that stuff, and then we kind of go into each, she's doing like a full cycle, so she's doing the Australian Open, Wimbledon, the US Open, and the French Open. That was not in the correct order, but it was just as they kind of came to my mind. And she has like she has a friend who's also trying to do like a new record, and there's like a romance, and I loved this book. Tennis is my favorite sport. I love watching it. It's the only sport that I actually really like watching, and I loved the way that Taylor Jenkins Reid described the tennis matches in this book. I love Carrie Soto. I know a lot of people don't like her, but I think she was so well written. She feels like such a real person, and I love her growth over the course of the story. And yeah, I just read this book so fast. I was not expecting to enjoy it as much as I did, but I absolutely loved it. And I cannot wait to see what Taylor Jenkins Reid comes out with next. Now we're down to the top 3, and at number 3, I have another Renee Attia book, which was The Rose and the Dagger. This is the sequel to The Wrath and the Dawn, another series that I really wanted to finish up. I read the first book in 2021, and I decided to finish out this series. And again, this is another book that I was not expecting to love as much, but I absolutely loved the way that this story went. I think my main problem with The Wrath and the Dawn is I just didn't love the storytelling aspect, which is obviously like a huge part of the book, but this one definitely deviates from that. We have more of like a journey going on. We see Shahrazad and Khalid kind of separated for the beginning of this book. There's a lot more magic and mythology, which of course I love. And I love the setting of this book. The Middle Eastern setting and inspirations were amazing. And I just thought the plot was a lot more interesting now that we had kind of gotten away from that story setting. We get a lot more perspectives in this book as well, and I just loved it. It's one of my like new favorite fantasy series, and yeah, I'm super excited for Renee Attia's next book. My second favorite book of the year was Lightbringer by Claire Legrand, another finale. This is the third and final book in the Imperium trilogy, which I reread the first 2 books this year, and I finally got to this one, and I think this was like one of the best finales I've read in a really long time. I loved the way that everything came together. I loved the characters. There's a lot more perspectives in this book aside from just Eliana and Riel. This book, I didn't even explain what the series is about. I didn't even explain what The Rose and the Dagger is about, but that's obviously a 1001 Nights retelling. And Furyborn follows two main characters, Riel and Eliana, who are two queens separated by 1,000 years, and there's this prophecy that two queens will emerge, one of light and one of blood, one to destroy the world and one to save the world, and they're kind of trying to figure out which queen they are, and this book obviously finishes all of that off, and it is amazing. I literally devoured this book. It's almost 600 pages, but I read it so fast. I loved the plot of this book. I thought it was the best plot of all three books. It was the fastest, and it was just, there was so much happening. There was so much to kind of piece together that I didn't think that Claire Legrand would do it, but she did it, and she did it flawlessly, and I cannot wait for like more fantasy series from her because she does it so well. And the way, like, the epilogue of this book was perfect. I still think about it. It was so good. And then my number one favorite book of 2022 is The Stationery Shop by Marjan Kamali. I'm not even gonna describe this book because I went into it not knowing anything and I was blown away by this book. I actually cried while reading this book, and I never cry while reading books, but this one did it, and the characters in this book are so amazing. The writing is some of the best that I've read this entire year. It's so beautiful. I still think about certain scenes from this book, like, very regularly, and I am, like, sad that I will never read this book for the first time again because it was that beautiful. The story was so amazing. Part of it is set in Iran, and the other part is set in America, and it was just so beautiful. I loved the two main characters and the plot of this book. It's a literary fiction book, so the plot isn't, like, that crazy, but there's still so many plot twists in this book, and, like, I was just hooked while reading it, and it was like, I had, like, a cross to bear because I wanted to read this book so fast, but I also did not want it to end because it's pretty short. It's only, like, 300-something pages. I don't even think it's barely 300 pages, so I was, like, devouring this book at the same time that I was, like, trying to savor it. So if you read, like, one literary fiction book, let it be this one, because it was so good. I, like, don't know if Marjan Kamali has any other books, but I need to read them, and I definitely plan on rereading this in the future because it was amazing. So that is it for my favorite books of the year. Now let's pour some salt on all of those opinions and talk about my least favorite books of the year. So this is probably going to be pretty short because I kind of just, like, didn't like any of these books, but the worst book that I read this year, actually I'm going to start with the least disappointing and work my way to the most. So the number 8 book on this list is kind of just one that was a little bit frustrating and disappointing, and that was House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J Maas. I was expecting to love this book because Sarah J Maas always knocks out of the park with sequels, but this book was just very, very long, clearly, and it was just, like, not exactly what I wanted. I have a full, like, hour-long review of this book, so you can watch that. I'm not going to get too much into it, but this is the 8th book on my list. Then number 7, I don't know why it just got so dark out, but I have Pachinko by Min-Jin Lee. Again, I was expecting to love this book, and I was expecting it to be, like, this great literary fiction book. I had just finished reading The Stationery Shop, and I was like, I am going to be obsessed with this book. That was not the case. I tried not to think about this book just because it was so disappointing. Like, I was really enjoying it in the beginning, and I know so many people love this book. Like, so many people are obsessed with this book, and I went into it with the best mindset. I was like, I'm gonna love this book. Everyone says it's so amazing. Like, everyone says it's so lyrical and beautiful. Yes, I will commend Min-Jin Lee. She has great writing. But the plot of this book was so painful. Like, in the beginning, I was enjoying it. I was like, this could be a 4-star read. But by the end, it just got so convoluted because you would get so attached to characters, and then this is a generational story, so you would just get, like, their kids, and then their kids, oh, and then their friend, and there were just too many perspectives, and I know it's a literary novel, I know, but there were just too many perspectives in two different places, and too many, like, different places to the point where I was like, please stop, because it took me so long to read this book just because I could not, like, get myself to read it. And in the beginning, I gave it, like, when I first read it, I gave it, like, 3 stars, but I honestly don't even remember this book, like, to the point where it's like, why would I give it 3 stars? Do you know what I mean? Like, I can only remember the bad things. I don't remember anything that, like, made it good, so I actually lowered my rating to 2 stars because I just didn't really care. Like, it's like, even the back, it says, like, richly told and profoundly moving, Pachinko is a story of love, sacrifice, ambition, and loyalty. Yes, it is, but is it good? No. Then I have Party of Two by Jasmine Guillory. This is, I don't even know what it's about. I'm not going to describe the books that I didn't like because I don't really want to spend too much time talking about them. It was just boring. Like, it was so boring, and I read 4 Jasmine Guillory books last year. 2 of them I enjoyed, 2 of them I really didn't enjoy, and this is one of them. It was just so boring. Like, again, I had to force myself to read this book. It's short. It's literally, like, I don't even know. It's 310 pages, and it took me like 4 days to read because it was so painful, and there was no, like, I didn't like the characters. I don't think they had any chemistry. The writing was bland. Like, it was just kind of a conglomeration of very miserable things happening. But, you know, Pachinko, I'm probably going to give it to my grandmother. I'm probably going to give this to, like, my sister or one of her friends, or even my mom or someone who wants to read it. So, even the bad books, some good things come out of them. Then I have Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb, I believe. I read this book because I thought it would change my life because it's about, like, therapy and everything. I was going through a tough time. It actually did the opposite of what I was hoping. It was just not good. It went into, like, her patients that I really didn't care about. Like, they were all, like, so uninteresting. And she just seemed like a very unstable person. Like, I didn't understand how she could... Obviously, therapists, like, they have their own lives. A lot of them go to therapy as well. And their therapists go to therapy. And they're, like, it's this long chain, I'm sure. But this woman just seemed, like, so unfit to be a therapist to the point where I was concerned for her patients. Number 4, I have another Jasmine Guillory book, which was The Proposal. Again, kind of the same reasons why I didn't love Party of Two. I just disliked The Proposal a little bit more. I thought it was, again, pretty bland. The characters, again, did not have too much chemistry. You get the gist. Number 3, I have An Arrow to the Moon by Emily X.R. Pan. I love I almost said The Afterlife of Polly Chase. The Astonishing Color of After. It's one of my favorite books, like, of all time. I love the characters in that book. I love the writing. The plot was amazing. And I was expecting the same from this book. It had been a really long time since she wrote a book. This had, like, mythology, all that. It was one of the most boring books I've read in my entire life. Like, the characters in this book were so boring. The chapters were so short to the point where you would finally get invested and then it would switch perspectives. And there were so many perspectives in this book, whereas, like, in The Astonishing Color of After, it was just one perspective throughout the entire book. And yeah, you changed, like, from time to, like, the timeline wasn't linear, but still you got, like, the full story from one character. But this book bounced so, like, rapidly between perspectives to the point where you never, like, knew whose head you were in and what you were doing and who was, like, it was so confusing. And the writing, yeah, the writing was really beautiful and lyrical, of course, but it was just, like, so not miserable, but it was just, like, to the point where I didn't understand, like, the point of this book and, like, what it was even trying to do. And, like, I predicted the ending from a mile away just because of mythology, and so, I don't know, I just don't really like this book, obviously, because it's on my worst list. And the second worst book that I have on my list is one of the most shocking, because I love this author, and that was Gallant by V.E. Schwab. This is, like, just about this girl who ends up going to this freaky house, and there's, like, a garden wall and this portal and everything, and this book was so melancholy. Like, one of the most depressing books I've ever read. It was so drab and gray, and it was so dark, and I honestly don't even feel like this book was a book. Like, it easily could have been a novella, because you can see, like, the darker sections are just either illustration. There's only 8 illustrations in this book, but they're all repeated so many times. There's journal entries that she finds that literally take up an entire section of this book, like, interspersed with all of the pictures, and they take up so much of this book. They're just repeated over and over and over. And I understand that it's the main character, like, discovering things and piecing things together, but the reader doesn't need to be shown those things over and over again. It kind of just felt like page filler. And it was just such a dark book to the point where, like, by the end, I didn't understand what the, like, thesis was. So, yeah, that was my biggest complaint about this book. And it's really unfortunate, but I believe in V.E. Schwab. I believe that she will come through with another amazing book. This was kind of just a bump in the road. And then number 1, the worst book that I read this year, is actually one that I'm not too passionate about, just because I completely forgot I read it until I was compiling this list, and that was Valiant by Holly Black. This book is literally 250 pages, and it took me a week to read. So that should tell you how horrible it was. It's the sequel to Hive. It's the Modern Fairy Tale series, and it was legitimately so horrible. Like, so horrible. The characters were awful, the writing was so bad, the plot was nowhere to be found, and the writing was nowhere up to the par, or like up to the level that Holly Black writes now. And I know this book is a million years old, like from the early 2000s, but it really shows, and it's like, it's so awful. It was the only 1 star that I gave this year. I can't even talk about it. It was so bad. So yeah, sorry to leave you all on a bitter note, but that is it for this video. Obviously the books that I read I loved, and the books that, wait, what did I just say? Obviously the books on my top 10 list I loved, and the books that were on my most disappointing list, apart from like House of Sky and Breath, because I did actually enjoy that book, it was just like a little bit disappointing. All the others were very questionable. I would love to know what your favorite and least favorite books of the year were. I'd love to know if you read any of the books that I talked about and what were your thoughts on them. And yeah, that is it for this video. I really hope you guys enjoyed. All of my social media links are in the description box below, and I will see you very soon for a new video. Bye!